The Norman and Florence Brody Family Foundation is dedicated to exploring topics of national and international importance and is proud to support Policy Watch with Doug Besheroff at the University of Maryland. From the University of Maryland, this is Policy Watch with Doug Besheroff.
After the Republican Party suffered huge electoral losses in the midterm elections of 2006 and the loss of the presidency in 2008, many have come to believe that the Republican Party and conservatism in general are in crisis. While many pundits and politicians urge conservatives to hold firm to the principles espoused by Ronald Reagan in the 1980s, others within the Republican Party argue that a political makeover is necessary to deal with the policy challenges of the 21st century. One such voice is David Frum, a former speechwriter in the Bush White House, who argues that demographic changes in American society mean that Republicans are losing their traditional voting base, that without new and innovative conservative solutions to issues like health care, energy, and the environment, Republicans are heading for electoral obscurity. He joins us now to discuss the future prospects of conservatism and the Republican Party, as well as his latest book, Comeback: Conservatism That Can Win Again. And now, Doug Besheroff.
David Frum, welcome back to Policy Watch and the University of Maryland. Let's talk about your latest book. It's called Comeback: Conservatism That Can Win Again. But not all the people watching this program are conservatives, let alone Republicans. We'll make that distinction in a minute. Who should care about a comeback for Republicans besides Republicans, or conservatives besides conservatives?
Everyone who's interested in politics, because one of the things that becomes kind of grimly, just a grim fact, is actually political parties, when they go bad, tend to go bad always in the same way. And the processes of recovery when I, as a Republican who's worried about my party, look for examples of successful recovery. I study the examples of the British Labour Party in the 1990s. I study the examples of the American Democratic Party in the 1980s. Because a lot of the things you have to do, a lot of the ways that you get out of sync with where the country is are consistent, and so are the ways that you get back in. I have this joke about how every defeated party goes through 4 phases, and the same 4 phases. The first phase is, we didn't really lose. The other guys, they got a more charismatic candidate. That doesn't count. And that Democrats would say that after 1980, and I think a lot of British conservatives felt the same way after Tony Blair was elected in 1997. The second phase is, okay, we lost, but only because the voters are idiots. And that's that. Again, you can see that happening to the Democrats in the 1980s. That they got very disgusted with the American electorate. How could you not see through this Ronald Reagan fraud? The third phase is, okay, yes, we lost, and maybe the voters aren't idiots, but there's nothing we can do without betraying our sacred principles. And again, you see that pattern in other parties. And the fourth phase, the final phase, the one that is the prelude to your comeback, is maybe there are some things we can do without betraying our sacred principles. So one of the things that I hope that someday, when it's the Democrats' turn, or British Labour, the German Social Democrats, or whoever it is, because they will look at a book like this and say, here's an analysis of how you get into trouble, how you might get out of it, and it may have some bearing on our experience, because politics in democratic countries actually has a kind of family resemblance.
And before we get into the comeback and how to do it, why don't we talk a little bit about how the Republicans fell from grace?
Yes.
And I suppose the place to start is George W. Bush and the view that his presidency was a catastrophe, and that in 2006 the voters turned on the Republican Party because of that. How much should we attribute just to the appearance of a failed presidency?
Well, let me be, I think we have to be more precise about what we mean when we talk about failure and what failures are important. There are 2 candidates that are identified as the specific triggers most often. One is Iraq, and the second is the financial meltdown that started in the spring of 2008 and really accelerated into full-fledged catastrophe in September and October of 2008. Now, I will strongly argue, I argue, I think, in the introduction to the paperback, and I've argued in other essays, that those are not the triggering factors. As for the financial meltdown, if the financial meltdown had somehow been postponed until November and December, the Republicans would have lost anyway.
Well, they'd already lost the Congress 2 years before.
Right. That's right. But if the only issue in voters' minds had been Iraq, we have a lot of data about where people were by the November of 2008. The country had, when you ask people, is the country, are things going well in Iraq or going badly, there had been a huge upsurge in American optimism about the direction of the Iraq war. When you ask people which candidate did you trust most on Iraq, John McCain consistently beat Barack Obama. If the election had been a referendum on Iraq, insofar as you can get into the voters' heads through opinion polling, those opinion polls suggest that McCain should have won. I think the key, what went wrong for the Republicans, and you're a public policy expert, you'll have even more informed views on this than any of us, that the performance of the typical person's income in the term before an election, and especially the year before the election, it's not everything, but it's so close to being everything, it might as well be everything. The median worker before the recession, at the end of 2007, was earning no more money than that median worker had earned in the year 2000. That was the core of the Republican problem. Even before the recession, even before the crash, people were not better off as a result of the George Bush administration economically. And so even though they had changed their minds about Iraq, and even though this recession obviously was a catastrophic factor at the end, had it been somehow postponed, it would not have saved the Republicans, because that was the core problem, the failure to deliver economic benefit to the typical person over 8 years.
Well, it's interesting you say that, and I'm not surprised you say it, because partly it's in the book, but I thought you would have gone the next step and to say that, and the Bush proposals to deal with the problems facing the middle class seemed either irrelevant or were easily vilified by the Democrats, his proposals for Social Security, all these things which were, at least the problem was an accepted problem, his solutions seemed to have no traction at all. So I guess I would say it's the concrete problem of the no increase in living standards for the middle class, but also no message for the middle class.
Right. There's no now that we have to distinguish between the Bush message and the McCain message. I mean, McCain truly had no message on this question.
Governor Palin, but we'll get to that in a minute.
He had no, but on the economic, because look, one of the things that happens, and the reasons why political philosophies, not just parties, I think there's a life cycle theory to this. And those of us who are the core group in the electorate that are most conservatives, my generation, people between the ages of 40 and 50. I'm on the older edge of that. I'm 49. For those of us in that we experienced as young people the economic crisis of the late 1970s, we began to look for solutions. And if we were public policy minded, then we discovered the new microeconomics, we discovered deregulation, we discovered Milton Friedman and a monetary theory. And I remember how infatuated I was with these ideas in 79, 80. And we had the experience of telling our parents about them, and our parents saying, that's ridiculous. These ideas are completely discredited. John Kenneth Galbraith is the man to look to. And having this argument as young people, and my departed mother, who was a genius, I'm a brilliant woman, but we would have these arguments about Friedman versus Galbraith. She believed in Galbraith. And you've had to defend your ideas, you have to defend them under fire, and then there are events, and you feel vindicated, and your generation comes to power and begins to implement a series of ideas. And I think that the constellation of conservative ideas that took form in the late 70s were implemented, and by and large, they really worked. But as any trade unionist can warn you, if you work too successfully, you can work yourself out of a job. And so you solve these problems, and then you have exhausted the potentiality of your generation set of public policy ideas. And so tax cuts are a very powerful idea in 1981. They're not a powerful idea in 2001. Deregulation of the transportation sector, and moving the United States off the vestiges of the gold standard. These are good ideas in the 1970s. Regulating banks is not a good idea in the early 2000s. And and you can just see ideas outliving their usefulness and coming to the end of their career.
And you mentioned welfare reform, and which was done, fighting crime. These were all conservative Republican themes, and by the year 2000,
they're successful.
They're successful.
They're so completely successful that nobody remembers them anymore. I mean, I always say that my advice to politicians is people do not use their votes to say thank you. I mean, they didn't say thank you to Winston Churchill in 1945.
For winning the war.
They're not going to say thank you to you. They may build you a statue, monument. I mean, democracies do have memory and are gratitude, but that's not what they use the ballot for. The ballot is for tomorrow's problems.
So we both work with ideas, so we're supposed to believe that ideas have power.
Yes.
And we'll get to that in a moment. But let's think just about the people in the Bush administration. And you were one of the most outspoken critics of the Harriet Miers nomination. Yeah. And I'm going to ask you to generalize about that, because I think many people at the time and looking back think that that was emblematic of the kinds of appointments that seem to have been made top to bottom, which is, if not friends of the president, then people who met some kind of pro-life test or whatever, and were not necessarily the most accomplished people to run a government.
Look, there is, I say that in the Right Man book, that there was a real talent problem in the Bush administration. And there are very complicated sources for that problem. And part of it is governments tend to be staffed by people at a certain age group. Typically, I mean, White Houses are full of people between 27 and 33, and administrations, the rest of the administration are full of people a little bit older, but not that much older. The political appointees, I mean, because you're getting people before they're worrying about saving money for college, and when they can still come home at 7 and 8 o'clock at night. So the question is, what is that cohort like? And if that cohort leans against you, as that cohort was already leaning against Republicans, it's hard to get the best people. But I think they're also, some of it is the president's fault. I mean, he was a very, as we've discussed before, he's a very mistrustful person. There was a closed circle of people that he had confidence in. He valued personal loyalty. And then we have this problem with what has happened to the Republican Party, which is it is a party that increasingly identifies conservatism not as a set of ideas, but as a set of cultural postures. Cowboy boots are conservative, loafers are not. Well, that's a crazy way to think, right? But there's a lot of that. You eat certain foods that makes you a conservative. You eat other foods. And think about during the 2004 campaign, where there's mockery of John Kerry because he didn't want Cheese Whiz on his steak. And
it's Philadelphia steak.
Philadelphia, thank you. And how is that reflective of your ideas? I mean, why can't you can be right wing and dislike Cheese Whiz, and you can be left wing and love Cheese Whiz?
But to press you on this, and I'm going to borrow from the opening of your book to make my point. But I think what we saw in the Justice Department scandals, we learned about many people at Justice and also at the White House who had gone to evangelical colleges and law schools and simply didn't seem to be the equal of the kinds of, and I hate to be an elitist about this, is the University of Maryland, but they weren't the Ivy Leagues that tended to otherwise fill those kinds of jobs. And it does seem, reading your book and others, that there was a heavy religious tone to many of the appointees. Why don't you tell people about your first interview with Gerson?
This was the first thing I heard, literally when I crossed the threshold into the White House. On the first day that I was there for breakfast to be interviewed, I was being walked in by Mike Gerson, the chief speechwriter, and we were met by somebody who later became a very good friend of mine, who said, "Hey, Mike, missed you at Bible study." And I was made clear, I mean, it's not compulsory. You don't have to go to Bible study, but it also became clear it wasn't exactly uncompulsory either.
It was noticed if you weren't there.
Yeah, well, let me put it this way, the people who were there formed a very cohesive group. And that's for sure right. But there are a lot of very smart people who are very intensely religious. That's not the core of the problem. I think the core of the problem, and it became very evident during the battle over Sarah Palin. I have had this idea that what was even more damaging than the Palin choice was that once the Republicans realized what they'd got when they got her, and they made that decision in a very careless way, the defense of her was more damaging. Because what we ended up having to argue in order to defend her was to say, well, it doesn't matter whether the vice president knows anything. That's not important. Actually, you don't have to be that smart to be in government. Now, this is a country where in every other sphere of life, formal qualifications are becoming more and more important, and where systems are constantly becoming more demanding, and where the intellectual level of the kind of work that people do. I mean, this is not a country where there are a lot of stevedores toting barges and toting boxes anymore. And people work in technology, they work in medical systems, and they know the kind of people they expect as colleagues, or if they're making a hiring decision for their life sciences office, what they're going to look for. And when you say in the skills that are indispensable when you're hiring a nurse's aide are not so important for the Vice President of the United States, that defense is more lethal than the mistaken appointment in the first place.
And you have said that the GOP will have to get sicker before it gets better.
Yes.
What's that mean?
What that means is that the natural tendency of any defeated party is to go to its extreme. And we see this what happened in 1980. The Democrats lose with Jimmy Carter, who was a Democrat who had signed various kinds of deregulation measures, and at least on domestic issues was sort of a more conservative Democrat. He'd faced a primary challenge from his left from Ted Kennedy. How did the Democrats respond? They said, well, the problem obviously was that Carter was not loyal enough to the New Deal and the Great Society, and they followed Carter with Walter Mondale, the last and purest of the New Dealers, and they got hammered. And the same thing happens in Germany. After Helmut Schmidt goes out, they then nominate somebody from, again, the ideological extreme. Because what parties don't want to, like all of us, people, thinking is hard work. Rethinking is hard work. Rethinking means beginning with self-criticism, and that's not only hard work but unpleasant work. So the first is to say, obviously, we have deviated from our true principles. It's not us; it's them. If we can only fall back on our roots, and you see that, you've seen that very much in 2009. I think you will see that in the 2010 off-year elections. There will be a tendency to do this, and it will look like it's working because we're going to have very persistent unemployment, and so the president will have popularity problems. Now, I think it's amazing how popular he is, given how savage the recession has been. But it's very easy to persuade yourself, see, he's having this steep decline in popularity, and the country's obviously dissatisfied, who wouldn't be with 9.8% unemployment. There's an opportunity for us. We have to go back to our roots. We're out of office because we lost our way. We have to go back to the tried and true Republican method. And I think this is just going to be a calamity. That's not the problem.
And the problem, I think, as you see it, is that the party does not have policies that appeal to contemporary America.
It doesn't connect. It doesn't connect with the. It is. I often say the Republican Party is running to lead a country that doesn't exist anymore.
Now, people think about that first as demographics. In your book, you point out, I think in 1980, I might have this wrong. 80% of the country was white. By 2020. It'll only be 60%.
Yes.
So a large percentage of a combination of African Americans, Latinos, Asians, and other immigrants. Yes. And as of now, that 40% finds the Democratic Party to be its natural party.
And this is a change. Look, Republicans have had trouble with African Americans since the African American vote since the early 60s. Although before then they did well with African Americans, but since the early 60s they have not done well. And for a generation after Barack Obama, I expect, how it would be completely unrealistic to expect that there would not be a lingering economic benefit to the party that elected the first black president among black Americans. The Latinos, I think, are going to be troublesome for Republicans because if we break them, the single largest and fastest growing group of Latinos are Mexican Americans, and they just tend to be poorer than other people. And as they legalize, they are going to be eligible for government programs, and they have a lot to benefit from them. They are natural beneficiaries of government, and they will be natural. But this idea that Mexican Americans are going to vote Republican because they're going to care more about abortion than they're going to care about Medicaid, I don't think that's very realistic. They're going to care about Medicaid a lot more than they care about abortion. But But Asian Americans, which were in the 80s, Asian Americans meaning East Asians, which were in the 80s a solid Republican constituency, have been lost. South Asians were too small a group to count in the 70s and 80s, but they ought also to be a Republican constituency, and they're not. But the one that most frightens me, because this is an area where the Republican, among these ethnic groups, that you can see there are real cultural reasons why Republicans would have difficulty. In 1988, the elder Bush beat Michael Dukakis among whites with 4 years of higher education by 25 points. In 2008, John McCain beat Barack Obama among that group by about 2 points. Outside the South, he lost that group to Barack Obama. Now, whites with 4-year college degrees are an enormous part of the population, much bigger than Latinos. In 1990, about a fifth of American whites had a 4-year degree. Today, almost 1/3 do. And if that's the group, that group used to be the core of the Republican vote, and it is turning against the Republican Party, and that is a problem that ought to be fixable. That ought to be priority one.
And that's the group that you focus on, and your list, and let me read it over quickly, and then we'll hopscotch through them. Right? That's the group that you think the conservatives have to find policies that match their needs, but also have some conservative echoes. And that's everything from taxes and the deficit to health care, education, the economy, immigration, and foreign policy as well. What's a conservative version of health care?
Okay. For Democratic health experts, the essence, the robustness of the public option comes because the government will set prices. The reason they want the public option is not just because they like government ownership. That's not the important part. The point is that government ownership creates the opportunity to impose prices, to, as economists say, administer prices. Now, the line between administered prices and negotiated prices, between price control and a market, that is a core conservative line. And your conservative healthcare policy has to be built on the idea what we want to do is to understand why is it that market price competition is leading to price inflation. Why normally that holds prices down for just about everything. And so we need to, what we have here is a government failure that we need to study. And I have a series of proposals. One of the ideas I'm very interested in, for example, is getting the states out of the business of regulating health insurance. Right now, we do not have a national health insurance market. We have 50 state markets, each with their own set of rules. There can't be a Sam Walton of healthcare because you can't create a low-cost provider of a basic service and take advantage of the huge economies of scale of the United States. Instead, you're running a series of smaller markets. But identifying obstacles to effective price competition and removing them, that is the essence of a conservative health policy.
Now, you were a former presidential speechwriter, and I will not ask you to name names, but I think I have difficulty thinking of a conservative or a Republican candidate who could explain the conservative approach to healthcare the way you just did.
Well, look, no, I take Mitt Romney, who is not everybody's favorite person, but I heard him give an interview to CNN just 2 days ago, and he knows this issue backwards and forwards. He has thought about it very deeply. One may or may, I don't agree with every nuance of everything he has to say, but it would be hard to think of an elected official, a person who's held elected office, who knows as much about this issue as Mitt Romney does. And but I say that not to boast. I say it because I heard him speak about this for the first time in 2006. I was just entranced by his mastery of the issue. And then I see him a lot on television and at events in 2007. What happened to that guy? Where'd he go? Because now we have this different person who is operating. I mean, it's as if every time Mitt Romney would go to a Republican event, he would leave half his intelligence at home. What was wrong? There was a followership problem. Why didn't we want him to bring his best self, all of his abilities, which were very considerable?
I think that's a topic for another show. We're almost out of time, but I promised myself, I didn't tell him this, that I'd leave a minute or two at the end for you to talk about newmajority.com.
Okay. This is thank you very much. This is the website I'm editing, and what we're trying to do is to create a forum where people, especially young people, can talk about what the Republican Party of the future should look like. I write for it every day, but I am. It's not my project. It's a collective project, and we have to get younger people mobilized, and then we have to listen to them, because they tell children are the future, right? But people don't often think very much what that means, which is the future has a message for you. If they are the children, that means you are the past, or on your way to being part of the past, and you have to learn from them that they have a message from a new country.
This is an echo of the young Republicans of the 1950s and 60s.
Well, you know what? I have to think that although I am arguing for what might be called a more moderate republicanism, that I think my models are the young conservative Republicans of the 60s, but also the capital P progressives of the early part of the 20th century, and also the mugwumps of the 1880s. These are reform movements inside the Republican Party that say to their elders, you thought it was like this. No, it's like that. You think that what was important in 1865 is still important in 1885, you're wrong. You think that what was important in 1885 is still important in 1915, you're wrong. And sometimes leadership means the courage to listen and to learn even from people much younger than you.
Horrors. That sounds like a terrible thing to say. But on that note, David Frum, thank you so much for being with us.
I thank you.
This program was produced by the University of Maryland, which is solely responsible for its content. The Norman and Florence Brody Family Foundation is dedicated to exploring topics of national and international importance and is proud to support Policy Watch with Doug Besheroff at the University of Maryland.
We are PBS.